Hey guys, and welcome to week 4, part 2. I'm going to talk about Grand Union, which is the Zadie Smith reading that you guys wrote your discussion posts on, which were awesome. And then I'm going to talk about the upcoming literacy narrative assignment because I know that we've read about literacy narratives, we've read a few examples, and I've talked about them before. But your final literacy narrative, or at least the final draft that you turn in before the end of the semester with your portfolio, is due in about 2 weeks, and your outline is due on Monday. So make sure that you're watching all of this video because I'm going to talk about how to approach the outline and then go over some of the important due dates. So let's get started. Let me present. All right. So I put a list of some of the thoughts that you guys had, some common themes or points or questions that you brought up. And they were fantastic. I know I've said this before, but I'm seriously so proud of you guys. Your close reading and analytical skills are already really sharp, and I know that they're just going to get better as the semester goes on. But some points that a lot of you brought up were death and life after death in the story. So, like Ellie mentions, that Smith sheds light on the dark concept of death, which I think is a really good point. Even though Smith is talking about her deceased mother and deceased generations, there's still a positive and a beautiful and a loving tone to it, opposed to what we would expect or what we commonly think about when we talk about or think about death, which is sadness and pain and grief. Multicultural environment. So the idea of cultures being erased by the dominating culture. So a lot of you guys had questions about, like, why is her mother so negative towards what she calls Americanisms? What are Americanisms? There is this idea about, some of you thought that she was really hallucinating her mother, like that her mother wasn't even really there, and instead it's just her seeing people or things that remind her of her mother, while others took it as her literally, like, a more spiritual theme of being able to connect with her mother so powerfully, even after she's dead, that it feels really real. This idea kind of reminded me, if you guys have seen the cartoon Mulan, of whenever they go into the temples and then all of the spirits of the deceased come up and they can talk. That's kind of like what this makes you think of. The themes of mystery and ambiguity. So Smith kind of jumps right in, kind of like Zero Plastic that we read last week. There's not a lot of detail. We don't really know a lot of what's going on. It's really mysterious. And what does that do to us as the reader? This theme of femininity. So, like a lot of you pointed out, that it focuses on relationship to mothers and daughters, a lot of female family members and not just other family members. And some of you questioned why she does that. And then this relationship between generations and the relationship to time. The idea that this story kind of conflates time. And who was it? Jaden, I think, makes the point that time can be both divisive by separating people, but it can also unite people, kind of like in the story, where if you can be connected to them after they're gone, it can kind of be like time doesn't exist in a way. So these were really awesome. So some, like, to walk through a close reading, this was our background information that we were given. So that Zadie Smith is a British author. By the way, she's fantastic. If you ever want to read her novels, On Beauty and White Teeth are particularly great. But they also touch on this theme of multiculturalism. And this can be significant because Zadie Smith is from London, which happens to be a location that's especially multicultural. She discusses themes of race, gender, family identity, and place. They tell us what Grand Union is about. And then they mention that Smith's writing is about the complexities of living in the modern world and age and sexuality. So per our process of close reading, we learn about Smith, we learn about her writing, and we instantly think about, okay, what is the significance of this information? What questions does it make me have? And what assumptions can I make based off this information? So one thing that I want to emphasize is that I feel like a lot of times we are taught that there's like this XYZ, or like this one way to always approach looking for a meaning. So I've noticed, and this isn't a bad thing at all, but I've noticed that a lot of you guys your go-to is to think about imagery, and that's great. But instead of going into a reading thinking like, what metaphors am I looking for? What imagery am I looking for? Go through it reading and just focus on the weird or the confusing or the powerful. If the imagery is particularly any of these things and it pops out to you, great. But maybe you read a story and it's not so much the imagery, but instead it's like what you guys talked about, the vagary, the ambiguity, the mystery, like what's going on. Just focus on any passages that confuse you or that are weird or that kind of stick out as being separate, like a part of the story, but also transcending it, and gesturing towards some broader significance. These are some that I listed that a lot of you listed too, that made me either question what she meant or that stuck out to me as like, I need to think about this. So just for instance, when we talked about reading like a writer, one of the things that we talked about was really focusing on language. So at the very beginning of the novel, we know that Zadie Smith is biracial. We know that a lot of her writing focuses on issues of multiculturalism and race. And so within the first couple of sentences, she says that when she goes out to meet her mother, she finds the blackest place she can think of. So one thing that we can think of is, what does she even mean by the blackest and why use that word choice? These are some other points that points of the passage that I pointed out and that I had some questions about. And it's okay, like in this first quote that I did, if you really don't know what they're saying and it's just so confusing, just make a note of what does this mean. But always feel free to pause the video. I just don't want these to be too long. So I listed them here, but I won't read through every single one. But analysis is the important part, okay? So I noticed that in some of your PSA blogs, you guys are doing a really great job of previewing and summarizing, and then you start to go into analysis, and then you kind of hit this wall of not taking that extra step or two to really dig and explain why it's important, why is it significant. So when thinking of an analysis, you want to go back and reflect on, what did you learn from the background information? What questions and assumptions did you have? What passages stuck out? And then ask, how does this make me feel? What do I feel is significant or especially important about it? And what is Smith, for instance, saying about a certain situation, place, or issue? And how does it relate to something that goes outside of just the text? How does it pertain to you or people that you know, or the world at large? And one thing that I do want to point out is that this is all about your reading of the story. This is what you thought it was about, what you found powerful, whether it's a poem, a novel, or an argument. This is your analysis. So instead of trying to focus on what the right analysis is or trying to decipher what Smith specifically wants you to think about your reaction to it and go from there. Okay, so now I want to talk about the literacy narrative. So here are the important due dates, and these are on Blackboard, so make sure you check them out in advance. The literacy narrative outline is due this Monday, September 4th by 11:59 p.m. The literacy narrative draft for peer review is due the 21st. The peer review worksheet is due the 22nd, so the next day. And then the literacy narrative that you turn in for my feedback is due on the 25th. So take a look again at the syllabus for what the final portfolio consists of, because you will kind of touch up on all of your writing and then turn it in at the end. But for now, I want to focus on outlining, okay? So outlining is not something that I feel like we do a lot of in high school. Before we get to college, I feel like unless someone has taught you how to outline, you don't really think of it as an option, right? You feel pressured to just go straight into writing. But, and I know that some of you mentioned this in your intro, if you struggle with having a bunch of ideas in your head, having your thoughts go in a million directions at once, you have trouble focusing and right off the bat writing in a linear fashion, which means that you start with your intro, you have your thesis, and then you go all the way through the end. You don't need to outline like you would write a paper. So what I mean by that is when you go into Blackboard and you look at the week 5 assignment, it gives suggestions for how to do an outline that's more of a briefer version of the final draft. So you have to use full sentences. It guides you to Purdue OWL. And if you're someone that prefers to draft this way and you actually find that just going out and writing your draft from the get-go works for you, then head over there and look at those instructions, because I encourage you to do that. But I'm there with you guys that struggle with focusing and with your thoughts going everywhere. I have severe ADHD, so I really need to outline, and this actually really helps me get my thoughts in order. And so instead of constantly thinking and feeling like I'm focusing on the assignment at large, I just take it paragraph by paragraph. And to me, that's super helpful. So this is another way to outline that I suggest to you guys. So what that looks like is starting your first, like, do it in actual bullet points, kind of like how this slide looks like. Give your relevant background information, a catchy intro idea that you have, your thesis statement, which will work for other essays that we do, but for this, it's more of a what your literacy narrative is about. Then write in some bullet points some important scenes or conversations or moments that you know that you want to talk about. You can include quotes or images, etc. if you want to include them. Make this creative. And then you want to talk about, like, okay, so at the end of my literacy narrative or at the beginning, wherever you're going to put it, what is the significance? What do I want my reader to feel like is important about this story? Why is it important to me? How might it be important to my readers that are reading this? And how did it affect my relationship with reading, writing, literacy, and or a certain discourse community? And how do I feel about it? So bullet points are fine. Honestly, I'm not a stickler for complete sentences. If that works for you, do it. To me personally, that kind of defeats the purpose of an outline. We're like a bulleted outline. We're just trying to get our thoughts out. But do make them readable. So they don't need to be full sentences, but they can't be like gibberish that only you would understand. Don't make it more than 2 pages, between 500 and 700 words. And lastly, I'm happy to chat one-on-one with you guys about these. So if you want to meet with me over office hours, or you want to schedule a certain time to meet on Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate to talk about your literacy narrative at any point, we can do that. And I actually had to do this assignment a couple weeks ago. So in preparation for teaching you guys this. So I'm going to post my sample of my own literacy narrative in Blackboard under week 5, in case you guys want to read it for some inspiration about what you might write about.